The company only hires the best. Did you lie on your application and can't manage to reach the quotas, with the monsters being too hard to deal with and they keep touching you in inappropriate ways? Then this video's for you. It's time to prove to the company who the best employee is. Here's every monster in Lethal Company with tips on how to avoid them. The three categories in this video are passive or harmless if left alone, caution, which are dangerous and should be avoided, and deadly, which are aggressive and very dangerous. Starting off the passive category are the manticoils. These useless pigeons are located on almost every map and pose no harm to the player. The birds stand still until somebody runs up to them and then they fly away. That's about it. Upon flying away they do make noises, but haven't alerted any monsters in my personal experiences. In general, their existence is to make the map feel a little more alive. Up next are roaming locusts. These bugs move around in swarms and are also of no harm to anybody. They slowly move in a certain direction and disperse when something runs through them. I have had some instances where they do alert Iss Dogs, so be careful and try to avoid them at night. Just another creature to give the outside a little bit more of an atmosphere. Next we have the Spore Lizard. This derpy lizard may look antagonizing, but really they're no threat to anybody. When the Spore Lizard sees you, it will let out a gasp and run away. If you're close enough to it, it will release a Taco Bell fart and maybe even bite you out of self-defense. The bite itself is one of the weakest in the game, so if it does happen, don't sweat it. You can kill the lizard, but you gain nothing out of this. My best advice for this creature is by recognizing its footstep noises, so you don't mistake him for a deadly monster. Ah yes, the bane of my existence, the Hoarding Bug. These Chicago-bred dirtbags walk around the map looking for scrap to steal. Naturally, hoarding bugs are neutral, unless you get near their territory. The bugs bring all the loot they collect to a pile in the map, where they just sit there and stare at players that walk by. The bug will fly towards the player that gets too close and continue to harass them until the item is dropped or if the player leaves the building. However, there is the option to give the bug an alcoholic dad beating with a shovel. They are pretty easy to kill, but they take some of your health upon doing so. If you are going to steal for them, keep a shovel or a sign in hand and splat them like a mole machine. Next we have circuit bees. These bees are territorial and stay glued to their nest. When a player gets too close to the nest, the bees aggro and chase the player for a couple feet before returning back to the nest. The nest the bees lay on can be worth around 100 units if taken back to the ship. Picking up the hive will cause the bees to chase after you until you drop the hive, go into a building, or go into a ship and close the door. If the bees don't have a home to go back to, they will fly around the map pissed off and will light up anybody they see. The best tactic for obtaining the beehive safely is using the juggling method. Run towards the hive and back up to lure the bees a certain distance from the hive. Loop around the bees and pick up the hive while running in a straight line. If the bees start to get too close, drop the hive and repeat this whole process. It's best to do this at the end of the day, or else these guys will harass the players the whole match. The only downside to this are the monsters that come out at night, so be careful. Starting off the caution category is the hydro deer, or the blob so I call it. Even though the blob moves super slow, it could ruin any run if in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Standing in the blob will cause death in seconds. You can jump around the blob, but if you touch it just once, it can cause critical health. This stupid thing can even morb right over ledges. It will cockblock the doors you need to go through and is there just to piss you off. The blob is unkillable, but you can tase it if you feel so inclined. The boombox does freeze it in spots in certain occasions, but I found this as a faulty method, as when I try it, it still tried to touch me. If push comes to shove, try jumping on the railings around the map and carefully walk past it. Baboon Hawks, in my opinion, are the weirdest monster in the game. The rare spawn rate of these creatures make them pretty unknown to new players. Most commonly found at night, the Baboon Hawk jumps around and is very quick. Upon coming across a player, it will jump around him and occasionally lunge towards him. It does a decent amount of damage and it takes around 3 or 4 shots to kill a player. When there's just one hawk, then it isn't that hard to deal with. It's when there are 2 or 3 of them, that's when it becomes a problem. They gain confidence in numbers and will gangbang you so quick you won't even know it killed you. They are pretty easy to kill, but if they're in a group, best to leave them alone. Next we have the Earth Leviathan. This earthworm is more commonly among eclipse planets. The worm spawns under the map and tries to kill the player by jumping out of the ground. First, the worm will make a constant roaring noise that will be audible to the player. Second, it will shoot up debris from the ground. And lastly, then the worm will shoot out of the ground and kill anything in its radius. The best way for a player to avoid the earthworm's wrath is by saving stamina and running when the worms start shooting debris from the ground. Note that if the worm shoots out of the ground, standing on rocks or short objects will not save you. The Leviathan does show up on the ship's radar as a huge red dot, so if you see it, just know to be careful and save your stamina. Up next is the most commonly seen monster,
the giant enemy spider.
I don't have the spider as high up on my list because it's not all that hard to deal with, but the spider starts off walking around the bunker and laying spider webs around its location. If a player hasn't disturbed the spider during this phase, it will then crawl up on the ceiling and fall asleep. If the webs get touched or a player runs under the spider, it will awaken and aggro on any player it sees. The spider relies on sight rather than noise, so you can walk or run around it with no problem, as long as it doesn't see you. Stamina regeneration isn't too big of a problem with the spider, because your walking speed is basically how fast the spider moves. Getting cornered by the spider isn't necessarily a death sentence if you time your run and jump, but you can jump right over the spider suffering no damage. If you time it wrong, your health may become critical because the spider has the ability to two-shot players. The best way to deal with spiders is with a shovel or sign. If you jump on a railing, the spider will not be able to damage you, and you can take out your rage on the spider and whack him to death. The last creature in the caution category is the Bracken. The Bracken can be dangerous if you don't know how to deal with him, but with some knowledge and experience, he doesn't become too deadly. The Bracken roams around the map and sneaks behind players that aren't looking and snaps their neck. The player's body is then taken to the Bracken room, some backrooms looking room, and to be camped for the rest of the match. Players should keep a look around at all times because if the Bracken is spotted, it will back away and try to attack later. Do not stare at the Bracken during this though, or it will chase after you like a Karen at Winn-Dixie. The Bracken is killable if shocked with the taser gun and whacked to death, but this is very dangerous as he can one-shot people. Starting off the deadly category is the Snare Fleet. This facehugger has ended so many runs and killed so many players. The Snare Fleet climbs onto the ceiling and waits for players to run under them. The Snare Fleet then drops on the player, facehugs them to death, and the only way to survive is if a teammate whacks him or you run out of the building. But let's be honest, you can't see a thing, so getting to the door is nearly impossible. If the Snare Fleet drops and misses the player though, it will still crawl after the player and return to the ceiling after losing the player or killing them. The best advice for this creature is by looking up slightly, just enough to see the ceiling, or by constantly scanning, as it will detect snare fleas just before you walk under them. Staying in a group is also a viable option, but players don't often carry a weapon around, so the teammate next to you will hear your muffled screams as you slowly die. Iss Dogs come in next as one of the biggest game enders for new players. Iss Dogs are most commonly found at night and rely on sound rather than sight, thus their name Iss Dogs. When it hears any voice chat, walking, running, or any noisy scrap, it will make a grunt noise and start walking towards you. It isn't going to kill you yet, but when you hear the roaring noise, then you'd better book it. These dogs have the power to one-shot players, but at the expense of their accuracy. The dog lunges at players, but can miss at times if the player dodges it at the right time. The dog will slide and freeze for a couple seconds before chasing back after the player. The best advice when escaping an Iss Dog is running while looking at the dog to prepare for its lunge. It doesn't work 100% of the time, so it's best not to aggro the dog in the first place by muting your mic and crouch walking. Coming in next is the Thumper, or the walking torso. This creature has the loudest footsteps of any monster indoors. When the Thumper sees a player, it will roar and within seconds be running after the player like Gail Lewis running after a Walmart thief. It runs at light speed if running straight, but corners slow it down. The Thumper three-shots players and rather quickly. Do not rely on metal bridges around the map, as this guy just phases over them. The feature that makes this monster so deadly is its sight. Thumpers have the best sight indoors and can spot players from really far away, even if they are on the other side of a door. If a Thumper is chasing you, take as many turns as you can and drop the items you're carrying to get a little bit more stamina. Even when you lose the walking torso, he will rage and run all over the place till he calms down. More than one torso can spawn in one game, so be careful. One of the scariest monsters in the game are Coilheads. Coilheads themselves are not the hardest to deal with. It's when you have multiple monsters around you is when they become a game ender. When a Coilhead spawns in, it will rock around the map until it sees a player. Upon seeing the player, it will dart towards the player with super speed and pretty much insta-kill them. If the player looks in time though, it will freeze and move at any time it is not observed. These guys are unkillable, so don't waste your time trying. The best way to escape these creatures is having a friend with you. Closing doors is also a viable option, as it is a good way of freezing them in place for a couple seconds to get some distance. Next up are forest giants, or forest keepers. Mostly commonly found in forests, these guys spawn later on in the day to roam the forest. Forest giants are most commonly noticed by their loud footsteps and tall stature. With the advantage of super sight, the distance it can detect a player is massive. Noise doesn't attract the treemen, but crouching is a good idea to hide out of sight. These treemen are super fast and you can outrun them until you run out of stamina, and then you're pretty much boned. It will pick you up and eat you, but can drop you if it gets shocked by a zap gun or teleported. If the giant starts chasing you, your best bet is to drop your items and run for either a building or the ship, as they cannot enter the ship. On eclipse planets, they can even be found right at the start of a match, so it's best to avoid those planets. Next is the little girl. The little girl is the only monster that can chase players inside and outside of the building. It targets the most paranoid player and shows herself a couple times before attacking. Breathing noises can be heard if she is standing around your location. The girl will start running after the player, and the best way to escape her is by leaving the building, as she will now wait before attacking you again. The little girl is invisible to not targeted players, and if the targeted player dies, she will target another person until everybody is dead. The deadliest monster, in my opinion, is the Jester. The Jester can be found in the last 3 moves on the list. When the Jester finds the player, it will do nothing but follow the person. Stage 2 starts up when the Jester starts winding the music box up. This is when every player should run to the closest exit they can find and wait before returning inside. Stage 3 is the death phase, when the box grows a big freaking head and knows every player's location inside the building. It slowly gains speed till it is practically spazzing out, and after its cycle, it will return back to stage 1. The Jester limits the time spent in the building, which makes reaching later quotas extremely hard. Best tip against the Jester is to make sure all crewmates have walkies. The box winding phase is loud, but some players may not hear it. Okay, now we're going to talk about the non-monster related threats, starting with the landmine. Landmines can be scattered around the map and let off a red light and beep about every 5 or so seconds. If a player steps on the mine, when he steps off is when the mine will detonate and kill the player, and anything around him, monsters included. Teleporting a player off the landmine can be done, so the player isn't completely doomed. Next are the turrets. Turrets can be found around the map and in the weirdest places too. When a turret locks onto a player, an orangish laser will point at the locked on player and it will make a beeping noise. If the player stays locked onto the turret for more than 2 seconds, the turret will fire and kill the player if he doesn't run behind cover. The turret can detect and shoot players through railings, so make sure you're running behind a solid wall or object. Hitting the turret with a shovel or sign will cause the turret to continuously fire in circles for about 10 seconds, insta-killing anything it touches, so just don't. Next is the worst of them all, the quick mud, or quicksand. Whenever a player steps on the quick mud, the player will start to sink, and if he doesn't run backwards, he will sink and die, and all of his items will be lost. It is possible to detect quick mud by the darker color, but almost impossible at night or if it's in the shade. Best tip is to save at least half a bar of stamina just in case you need to sprint backwards. Last of all, we have the company's own tentacle monster, Jeb. Jeb is grumpy all the time and hates his job. Spam ringing the bell or making noises in front of his cubby hole and he will grab you and send you straight to Brazil. So do Jeb a favor and don't make him mad. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, don't forget to drop a like and a sub to help this channel out, as I am new to editing and voiceovers and will surely get better in the future. If anything needs improved editing wise, leave a comment and help me out. Thanks.